Socrates didn't scribble grand lectures on parchment. He curated puzzles that seemed simple, and in their simplicity, they pressed against the hardest truths we pretend to own. He spoke in questions, not sermons, and the effect wasn't ornament but clarity. The quotes attributed to him are often polished by centuries. But the real power lies in the technique that earned them a stubborn life in our minds. A craft of inquiry disguised as conversation. A method that makes a listener confront their own limits. The first technique is what we might call the art of the question. A quote like "the unexamined life is not worth living" sounds blunt, almost moral. But what Socrates is really doing is inviting a person to locate the line between belief and evidence. He doesn't condemn certainty. He maps the terrain where certainty lives and then asks, with a gentle insistence, whether that certainty can bear the weight of scrutiny. In modern terms, this is not cynicism but calibration. The quote becomes a tool to test our aspirations against our actions. The second technique is the ceremonial practice of Elenchus. The cross-examination that looks for contradictions without triumph or humiliation. Think of it as intellectual triage. Private beliefs are weighed against their consequences when tested against an alternative question. If I say, "I value justice," Elenchus asks me to demonstrate it in a concrete decision, not in a noble sentence. The discipline is severe, yet its flavor is curiosity, not cruelty. The effect is a more honest map of what we truly want and what we're willing to do to get it. A modern gloss on this technique is the habit of rephrasing the issue until the confusion dissolves into specificity. Socrates didn't want opponents to lose. He wanted them to see the edges of their own argument, to carry their conclusions into daylight and test them against real life. The third technique is the precise definition. If a word is slippery, the thinking stalls. So Socrates would press for a sharp, shared meaning before proceeding. He didn't debunk the other's wisdom by attacking the person. He pinned the claim to a clear boundary and watched the argument reveal its own limitations. The power of a well-defined concept is not control, it is release. When you know exactly what you mean, you can measure whether actions align with that meaning. And you could discover that many disagreements are not about truth, but about language. This is the hinge where philosophy becomes practical philosophy. Consider a quote like "Know thyself." It sounds intimate, almost devotional. But the real work is not gazing inward in awe, but mapping the habits, biases, and incentives that shape your choices. The technique here is symmetry. We test the inner life by the outer life, and the outer life by the inner critique. The paradox emerges not as a final answer, but as a continuing practice. The fourth technique is humility as strategic posture. Socrates famously claimed he knew nothing, a declaration that functions as a philosophical solvent. If you admit limits, you keep the door open to new evidence, to better questions, to the humility subservience. It is a deliberate stance that preserves the core of inquiry by refusing premature closure. When quotes feel inspiring rather than transformative, it's often because the underlying humility has been replaced by certainty masquerading as confidence. Now we come to a turning point. Because the hidden technique is not a quote alone, but a method that moves from theory to life. Socrates didn't want to convert minds into miniature philosophers. He aimed to convert routines of thought into practices of living. The dialogue was a rehearsal for decision. If you can hold a question under pressure for long enough, you discover a space between what you say you believe and what your daily behavior demonstrates. The quote serves as a compass, not a map of the whole terrain. The fifth technique is the use of paradox as invitation. Socratic paradoxes are not contradictions to be resolved. They are invitations to pause, reassess, and reframe the problem. Paradox wakes you from automatic agreement. It forces a gap where genuine reflection can enter. The mind, accustomed to certainty, slips into a more careful pace, when faced with a question that refuses easy closure. The paradox is not a trap, it is a doorway. SFX, soft_chime, 1. 5. As these techniques accumulate, a single thread emerges. The aim is not to win the argument, but to sharpen the seeker. The quotes we treasure are not medals for holding a position. They are tools for testing the position against reality, for refining intention until action and belief align. The twist arrives when we realize that Socrates' most famous quotes are not ultimatums, but invitations to ongoing practice. The unexamined life remains a cautionary beacon, not a verdict. The quote about virtue being knowledge suggests that knowing what is good is not enough unless you're willing to act on it, repeatedly, in the small choices that accumulate into a life. The hidden technique is continuity, a habit of questioning that survives scandals, distractions, and time. So what does this mean for us? Living in a world of rapid information, where every opinion comes with a loud microphone. It means treating quotes as prompts, not conclusions. It means cultivating a dialogue with our own beliefs that resembles Socratic conversation, gracious, persistent, unsatisfied with easy answers. It means recognizing that the real Socratic achievement is not the exact wording of a line, but the practice it embodies. To question, to refine, to act with intelligence. And to keep returning to the core questions that define our humanity. Resolution emerges as a quiet discipline. Do not worship the quote, study the method. Do not settle for polish when the underlying rigor demands endurance. The hidden techniques are not exotic tricks. They are the rudiments of disciplined thinking. Define, test, question, humility, paradox, and relentless practice. In that sense, Socrates remains not a figure of the past, but a teacher for any mind brave enough to revise itself. Ultra. The next time you hear a line attributed to Socrates, listen not for the conclusion, but for the method behind it. Ask, what question would I need to ask to test this claim in my own life? What would it mean to align belief with action under that scrutiny? The work isn't finished with the hearing of a quote. It begins there, in the quiet work of turning thought into living choice. If a single quote can spark a process, then Socrates' art is not a relic but a daily challenge. Keep asking, keep refining, keep choosing in the open space between knowing and becoming. Another thread to pull on is the way Socrates treats virtue as a skill rather than a gift. When he says virtue is knowledge, the claim isn't a boast about memory of rules. It's a dare to convert belief into reliable action. If knowing the good were merely a rule to memorize, then clever errors would be harmless. Instead, the tests are lived. Would you act justly when no one is watching? The method asks you to rehearse moral decisions under scrutiny, to see if your intentions survive under consequences. Consider the paradox. One might be wise and still be poor, or be virtuous and enemy rich, yet be judged for outcomes. The story Socrates uses of the wise man who ends up a fool become a mirror. We are performers in the theater of our judgments, and the curtain never fully falls. The techniques invite humility, not resignation. They require courage to revise mind and life when the map and the terrain disagree. Then comes the tension between asking and deciding. Socrates pushes us to test not just our beliefs, but the grounds on which we act. A quote becomes a puzzle prying open the gap between belief and behavior, between words and deeds under pressure. To inhabit that gap is to live philosophically, not to sermonize. We must also honor time. A quote without tempo is aroma without heat. The real technique is letting questions mature, revisiting them when life rewrites their relevance. The ancient method becomes a living dialogue inside a modern routine, commuting thoughts, boardroom decisions. Dinners of disagreement, where each choice rehearses the questions that shaped us. And the paradox invitation returns. If we must hold beliefs lightly, what follows? It provides responsibility, acting to align with the best answer, not the easiest comforting story. A single line becomes a long horizon of inquiry, a daily practice of returning to ground truths whenever the ground shifts. As we carry these hidden techniques forward, the mind learns to become a place where questions outlive certainty. The quotes become signposts, not destinations, compass needles that swing toward integrity as we move. The aim is not to master phrases, but to cultivate the discipline of asking well, listening honestly, adjusting course with humility, and acting with intention in uncertainty. Open question remains. Which quote nudges you to test your life tonight? Which definition of courage would you tighten until your actions align with it? The practice is simple in theory, ruthless in execution, and deeply human in memory. Notice how the techniques respect complexity, no recipe, only a tact of listening and recalibration. In a culture that prizes certainty, this is a counter-practice, a quiet rebellion of patient reason. Finally, we can translate Socratic tech into daily rituals. A 10-minute nightly audit of choices, a weekly rewording of a stubborn belief, a quarterly resoul search with a trusted friend. The point is not to become rigid, but to stay teachable, to protect the space where doubt becomes clarity. If a single principle holds, let it be this. The aim of wisdom is to increase freedom through better questions, not to secure a flawless verdict. To seek is to free oneself from the tyranny of easy answers, little by little, day by day.